In this tutorial, we'll be showing you how to set up container queries and giving you the link to the complete documentation free online, which houses the most complete documentation for this little bit of technology. Now here's the little example code and page that I'll be offering to you, and this is the link to the complete documentation if you want to do a really deep dive on it. And then I wrote here the best practice is use container queries for reusable responsive components without relying on global viewport breakpoints. So if you're looking to create something that has a responsive layout for a full page, you would just use media queries for that. But this is more like if you have a component that you're putting together. So you see as I scroll the size of this container, the layout inside that independent container changes. So if you're having a reusable module that you're placing on different pages with different size areas on it, or if you're creating a plugin that people can download and just put into their pages, this would be a handy way for your plugin to be dynamic in its layout according to what area and sizing on the page that people are putting it on. And I'm using a flexbox layout inside, but you can use a grid layout, or you can just have floating elements in there or inline elements, whatever way makes you more comfortable to make changes inside of the container according to the size of the container itself. So we're going to start out with this code that has no container query logic in it yet. So we have a document that has a style element, and inside that we have the body style, the style for the little input slider, which you don't really need. I just put the input slider in there to show you how everything changes when the width of the container changes. Then we have the, well, let me go show you the HTML first. The HTML is very simple, and all it really is this div with a class container1, and it has ID of C1. That's only so it can be controlled by this input range slider. So you don't really need the ID unless you want to keep the slider in there. And all the slider does is change the width in real time. So you have the div class container1, then inside of that you have a div class of inner wrap. And I would recommend, if you're going to do container queries, is to have yourself an inner wrap of some sort. And then inside of that we have as many divs as we want to put in there. And then inside of each one of those divs you can have images, paragraphs, any kind of elements you want. So the CSS, we get the container1 properties. Width is set to 60%. That can be whatever you want. The border doesn't even have to be there. I just put the border there so that way we see. Here, let me refresh. That way you see the parent container. But you don't have to have a border there. You can see this slider changes the size of that container. And since there's no container queries right now in the code, nothing happens when it gets smaller. So it's just regular flexbox getting bigger and smaller. And then in that container with the dotted border, we have a padding of 10 pixels. Then the inner wrap is the container that holds all three of the div elements, the content elements. That wraps around all of them. And it's set to display flex. So that's our flex box. The inner wrap is the flex box. And the flex direction is set to row. That way you have a horizontal layout. And when the box gets smaller, we're going to change it to a vertical layout using the container query. So each one of these three divs then gets this CSS right here. Inner wrap, div child, flex with a value of 1, margin, background color, border radius, padding, box shadow, and then I just put transition in there so you see a little animated effect when things change size. And that's it for the starting code. That has no container queries yet. So all you have to do is go into the parent-most container, which is container1. You see in the code, the div container1, the class container1. We're going to go right in the top and we're going to put this line of code. Container type property is set to a value of inline size. So that makes the browser listen for the container width changes. And this can have 3 or 4 different values that you can research on your own when you get time. You can listen for the width, you can listen for the height and width, and a couple of other values. Now, right before our style tag ends, we're going to pop in this container, the @container logic. And in between parentheses here, we have max width is set to 600 pixels. So if it's 600 pixels or less, the width of that container, we're going to change the inner wrap, which is right here. All this CSS can be changed. I'm just going to change one property, the flex direction, to column, to make it have a vertical layout. It starts with display flex, and then flex direction is row. So I'm going to change the flex direction to column to make the horizontal layout into a vertical layout. Then the inner wrap div children, just going to change the background color from a blue to a greenish. So now let's see what that does. Let's refresh. Now when it gets smaller, it should turn to, see how they're all horizontal layout? Now when we get smaller, it changes to a vertical layout and changes background color. Now we can keep making changes by putting another bit of container logic in, setting the max width to 400. So here we have the max width at 600, and whatever changes we want to do on those child elements. And then here we have max width 400 and more changes on the child elements. We're going to change when it gets to 400 pixels or less, then we'll make more changes. And we'll keep it at a vertical layout. So let's refresh, make it smaller, then smaller again. So you see there? And as you study the documentation, you'll see that you can also give the container a name. That way you can have cleaner container queries that target a specific style rule by name. So just to reiterate again, the best practice for container queries is use container queries for reusable responsive components without relying on the viewport breakpoints. So not only when you resize the viewport window, but it could be resized independently. And let's say you have a menu system that has buttons and all the buttons are horizontal right next to each other like that. If the space that you have that menu system in happens to become smaller, or you put it on a different page that only has a little bit of space on it, then it could be changed to a stack, more like that, where they're stacked vertically instead of horizontal layout. And if we take this link and navigate to it, you'll see just how much that you can learn if you really want to take a deep dive on it. There's a whole lot to it that you can see. Here are the values for where we put this here up top, inline size, to make the browser listen for the width changes. There's that value right there, inline size. You can just use size or normal. And there's a whole lot more here, and a whole lot of cool examples. See, for instance, here they're using the container name, my page layout, and then here where the container query is made, they have my page layout right before the parentheses. So it might help you make a cleaner query that way. There's also container shorthand right here. Container. You can have the name and the value you want for the sizing all in one line. So don't miss this page if you really want to take a deep dive on it. Alright, have fun with it.